Getting help from your parents might feel like a golden ticket into the property market, but it could come with strings attached that you didn't expect. In this episode, we'll unpack why relying on the bank of mum and dad could actually hurt your home ownership journey if you're not financially ready.
Welcome to Your First Home Buyer Guide, the podcast for first home buyers who want to become educated home buyers.
I'm Veronica and that was Megan. We are two of Australia's most experienced buyer's agents and probably old enough to be your mum, which is a good thing because between us, we've got almost 50 years experience to share with you, and together we're going to cut through the BS and make sure that you're well informed so you make better decisions.
Now, when you get to the end of this episode, make sure you check out the website, homebuyeracademy.com.au. Take a look at our course for first home buyers.
We've created an easy-to-follow course that builds on all of our professional experience to take you step by step through the whole home buying journey.
You'll know exactly what to do, when to do it, and be able to find your first home faster and easier with our guidance along the way.
It's the next best thing to having your very own buyer's agent.
Now, before we get into the interesting stuff, in this week's episode, there's the boring bit to do, and that's the disclaimer.
You, of course, know that nothing in this podcast is to be taken as personal advice. We always recommend getting the advice of an expert in their field who takes their time to personally understand your situation. Now, we've done our very best to ensure that the content is correct at the time of recording, but things change rapidly, so always check with the relevant government authority or your trusted advisors, or both, to get the most up-to-date information.
All right, Veronica, let's talk about the rise of the Bank of Mum and Dad, BOMAD, right? We're going to call it BOMAD because that's what everyone else calls it.
Yep.
And why so many people are getting help. Now, almost 50% of first home buyers now receive some kind of financial assistance from the Bank of Mum and Dad, with the average sum sitting around $120,000. Now, this is sourced from Martin North, so he does a lot of research each week talking to people in this space.
Yep. So we're referring to the 10-step process that we teach people to buy a property. We're talking about step 2, which is money here. So if you're looking at the video behind us, we have an infographic of the 10 steps, and we are in the preparation phase. I'm trying to point to it, and it's step 2, which is step 2, which is money.
Money.
All right. So obviously the rise of BOMAD, or the Bank of Mum and Dad, let's just call it BOMAD. It's a lot easier to say. It's been rising and rising and rising. We've been talking more and more and more about it. And, you know, we've been heard a number of different sources have said it's the 5th largest lender in the country now. So it's no longer the exception. It's becoming the norm. And rightly or wrongly, we're not really commenting on the social effect of this, being that if you've got parents with a home or with the funds to help you, then you are at a distinct advantage, absolutely, compared to someone who doesn't. And we're fully aware of that. But it's the fact is, this is what's happening out there.
Yeah.
So if you are going to be the beneficiary of some help from your parents or your grandparents even, you need to listen to this episode, because we're really going to talk through some of the risks that are associated with it.
Yeah. And there's a big danger, Veronica. There is a big danger that you skip the financial learning curve. Now, all of us, I had it, I'll talk about my situation, and anyone who's listened to the podcast it's probably picked up how I got into my first home back in 1998. But I absolutely had that financial basis taught to me as a young person. And what we mean by that is, you know, sometimes handouts can shortcut the hard lessons in life, you know, like saving and budgeting and managing money over the long term. These are skills that we need throughout our entire life. And getting what might seem like a bit of a handout or a leg up without learning those lessons could potentially put you in a bit of a negative or a bit of a situation where you might make some fairly big mistakes down the track because you haven't learnt the basics of financial management.
Yeah. So if you don't have good budgeting, you know, habits, or you don't really have a real understanding of how money works, cash flow, you know, loan obligations, ongoing costs of ownership, because maintenance is a big one. And this is the thing too that, you know, you've probably heard it said many, many times that Australians have a real problem with financial literacy in this country. And a lot of people saying we should be teaching this in schools. And I agree we should be, because these are life skills. But, you know, if you did 3-unit maths like I did, you didn't learn. The only thing I remember that was actually useful was compounding, which is a very useful thing to learn. But my
Very
daughter
good.
did social maths, or we used to call it veggie maths when I was at school. That was for the kids who weren't as good at maths, but she's come out with really good, much better life skills after doing veggie maths than I did from doing 3-unit maths. So, it's not unusual to get out of full education if you haven't done anything that's taught you these practical life skills around money.
We're certainly not using trigonometry when we're talking about financial literacy.
Not even calculus. All right. So it's why we do focus so much on these sort of types of conversations that we have. We want you to understand things like budgeting and
Cash flows and maintenance and rates and outgoings and balancing up when there's an interest rate change.
buffers.
Your buffers.
Good financial health, right? Now, we're not brokers, we're not financial planners, we're not qualified to even to give any advice actually on the financial side of things, but we do and are aware that you do need to have some good financial habits in place when you buy a property. And so that's one of the things that can fall by the wayside if you haven't actually learnt that discipline of budgeting, of saving, of foregoing life's little luxuries, and then your parents help you into a property and you continue living without those sort of disciplines in place. That's where people can get into trouble.
Bernard Salt is famously quoted, and a little bit, a bit rough, I think, that the problem is the amount of people having smashed avos, so they're not saving the money and learning the financial discipline of forgoing things in order to get what they want in the long term. Now, that was probably a little bit harsh, but what I guess the thing that we're trying to say is you can still develop these skills. You can still have this financial literacy. You can still understand how to go without, even with the input from the bank of mum and dad. So these two things can happen in tandem, but you can't skip that step.
No,
you've got to have those financial life skills.
And the reason that we wanted to bring this episode to you is because another thing that Martin North told me, this is what sort of prompted this, was that first home buyers who get financial help from family are 3 times more likely to default on their loan in the first 3 years.
Startling.
Absolutely startling. Scary. And so that's what we're talking about here. So that's the sort of, we can only guess as to what the reasons are, but it does make a lot of sense that money alone isn't the solution for first home buyers, that discipline and planning are really critical to make sure that your whole property owning journey is a success.
Yeah. So these are discussions that we, very much encourage people to have if there is an offer on the table from the bank of mum and dad to assist. And that is that you still have to service that mortgage. Even if you're gifted some money or lent some money, you've got to understand how much you're going to have to pay back. Now, if you're lent money by mum and dad to help you get into a bigger property or get into the property market sooner, you have to pay that back. So you need to roll that into your budget and make sure that you're allowing for the ability to not only pay the bank back, but to pay mum and dad back as well. Because the last thing you want to do is have a negative impact on those relationships because you haven't talked things through. You haven't worked out the what ifs. What if this happens? What if we can't afford it? What if we lose a job? What if we get pregnant? What if we're down to one income? These are all the sorts of things that you really need to have questions and answers around and discussions around.
Yeah, so there's some good habits that you can build before you borrow. Tracking your spending. Maybe 3 months, maybe 6 months, maybe even 12 months, understanding your money habits. So it's like what gets measured gets managed. It's a saying that gets used in business all the time. But the fact is that if you start tracking, it's a bit like if you went on a diet and you start a food diary, all of a sudden you realize you are eating more calories than you thought you were eating. It's the same with budgeting.
Sure, I didn't have that much yesterday.
Wow, God, that you had extra 3 months.
Just that. Have you ever done the exercise where you look at your bank account and you go, there is no way I spent that much in money. And then you add it all up and go, oh, God, I have actually. Yes, it's true.
Yep, I've definitely had that.
Definitely spent that. It didn't leak out anywhere and no one spent it for me. It was just me.
Yeah.
But there's another thing that you can do, and this is a really good one, and that is to practice pretend repayments. Transfer what your potential mortgage is going to be into a savings account every month. Make yourself be disciplined. Not only are you going to save a bit more, which will reduce the amount of the mortgage and therefore the amount of interest that you pay, but it gets you into such a good habit of disciplining yourself and making decisions about where you're going to splurge, on what and when, and it kind of makes it a little bit more special too, I think, when you hold back a little bit and you get the opportunity to do something really nice. It has, I think, sometimes a little bit more value, and you can enjoy it a little bit more because you're not doing it all the time.
Delayed reward. You actually, yeah. You know, it's funny. You're talking about my daughter doing veggie mass, and she's in her gap year, right? She's set up bucket accounts, you know, in her bank account. She's got all different accounts for different things. She's done that without any of my involvement. And so she's about to go traveling. She's got a certain amount of money that she's not going to touch. It's going to still be there when she gets home. I'm really proud of her, actually.
Oh, fabulous.
That's the sort of thing you need to be doing. And so she knows she's got her spending money, she's got her investing money, and she's got her saving money, and holiday money, whatever bucket she has. And that's a lot of people do swear by that type. It used to be the cookie jars, the cookie tins.
Yep.
You know?
My children did it.
It
was something I did with them quite young, actually.
In the olden days. So you can.
Mine was Dolmio jars, you know, the sauces. Yeah.
But bank accounts, it's so flexible these days, and there's loads of apps out there that you can use to help you. There's all these budgeting tools out there to help you do this as well. Whereas if you get everything going into your one account, and it can bleed out very, very easily.
It does. It looks big and then it's not there.
Yeah.
One of the things that you can do as an idea is to set up sort of like sinking funds for future expenses, because there's going to be repairs, there's going to be strata fees, there's going to be rates. These are often a bit of a surprise to new owners. And if you haven't really thought about how you're going to approach each of those, you could get a little bit shocked and be sort of scratching around going, oh, well, I don't have the savings for this. What am I going to do? So thinking about these future expenses, and certainly in the first home buyer course, in the money module, we do talk about how to set up your budget, things to think about, the sorts of costs that you might need to think about. So when you're speaking to the mortgage broker, you've got a really good idea of what your outgoings are currently and what they could potentially be once you are a homeowner.
Because that does take people by surprise. When you're renting, all you're doing is paying the rent, and you're going to pay the electricity bill and gas bill if you have one, maybe water bill. You know, you're not going to get hit with rates. You're not going to get hit with strata fees. You're not going to get hit with insurance premiums. You're not going to get hit with, you know, the gutter. Someone's got to get up there and clean the gutters. You know, there's a lot of additional costs in owning a property that you just completely unaware of. So getting
you think about every time you pick up the phone to the property manager, that's your cost now.
Yeah.
Got a leaky tap, that's your cost now.
Yeah.
Oven isn't working, that's your cost now. Like every time as a renter, you know, that's a way to sort of think, oh, if I had to budget for this and maintenance in my own home, could I afford it?
Yeah. So I think it's good to be aware of that there's going to be additional costs that you wouldn't even thinking of, and to start thinking, well, how would I spread those costs over, say, a 12-month period?
Yeah. Now this, Veronica, sometimes parental help can actually be a little bit harmful, and that can be where it leads to you buying too much house too soon. Now, last episode we talked about whether you should think about stretching up to your forever home, and there's pros and cons in doing that. That's it's something you can only arrive at yourself with some self-analysis. But it also brings in some sort of, you know, unspoken expectation that if somebody's financially investing in some way by giving you some money, that they should have a little bit of some input to where it is that you buy and what it is that you buy. And you might like that input, but you might find it was not expected and it wasn't what you had in mind when you accepted help from mum and dad.
Well, that's it. You might not necessarily get all the freedom of choice that you might want, right? So it can create sometimes those unspoken, and maybe they are spoken, actually, expectations or pressure, you know, around where, you know, where in particular, actually, because, if you're thinking about having kids, for example, your parents might want you to be nice and close to them, or maybe they want a hand. They're actually doing it because they want you to look after them, perhaps.
So they want the lawns mown every 2 weeks and the gutters cleaned.
Yeah, who knows? There's some payback. But, I think you've got to be really explicit, and sometimes it's really difficult to have these really explicit conversations around money and around, well, what is it you're actually expecting here? And also you want to get on the property ladder and you want a shortcut, so you want to grab it. So there's all these pressures to just do it and then worry about it later. But I think it's really important to get a lot of this stuff out, tease out first, because otherwise you could end up paying a little bit more than you might have wanted to. Because sometimes it is worth saying no thanks, or negotiate for help after you've set your own strategy in place. If you've gone out there and actually done all the work, say you've done our course and say you are super clear on exactly, what it is you want to buy, where you're going to buy it. You've worked through your borrowing strategy. You got everything sorted out, and you just know, now I'm going to need this much money from my parents to be able to help us out, and you go and present that. It's a little easier, I guess, to package that up and maybe stay on track than it is if you go in at first just asking them for the money.
Yeah. It is good to have a path and a strategy. Now, there is a smart way to accept the help, and I'll bring in a bit of personal experience here for those that have listened, and I hope that you've gone back and listened to all the episodes if you're new to us. There's a lot there.
And 234 before this one.
Binge away, my friend. But I got into the property market with the assistance. So I bought with my brother, and my parents went guarantor. So it actually meant that we could borrow 110% of the value of the property. Now, this is back in 1998, quite different.
A little bit different these days, isn't it?
My parents were mortgage free on their home, but it was a big conversation that we had. Now, you might be given a loan by your parents, you might be gifted the money, or in our case, we were simply allowed to use the equity out of mum and dad's house, but we were entirely responsible for all the repayments, for getting the loan. They simply, that equity came out of their property, so we didn't have to pay LMI. But we talked through what were the what ifs. Okay, so I was single, I was living in the house, my brother was investing in the house. I had to have a tenant in that other bedroom to pay him rent. What if there was no tenant? Well, I had to pay that much extra to him. What if I coupled up? Well, that person would have to pay rent. What if I got a transfer somewhere else? What if? There was all these what ifs that we went through. What if one of us could no longer afford the property? So we had these scenarios. So we actually just talked through to the best of our ability as young people with guidance from mum and dad. There were definitely gaps. There are so many things we did not know that I know now that, I would tell past self, you could think about these things as well. But if you document it and you're really clear, then when something happens, you can just draw on that decision and say, well, we don't have to get emotional about this. This is what we agreed to. We can either do this or we can't. And if we can't do it, then maybe the last option is it's sold. And that might be the final outcome if you can't reach an agreement on some other things.
Yeah, I think it's really important to have an agreement in place. And you can I would advise you to even get some legal advice on that. It's just, families and money can get really, so I think that's, best practice to do that. I think too that, always be thinking, remember that, that statistic about, first-time buyers who accept help from their parents or family are 3 times more likely to default in the first 3 years than those who don't. So think about any help from your parents as a leg up to strengthen your position, not sort of cover up over your weaknesses. And I think that if you deep down know that you don't have good sort of budgeting habits, or you haven't got good savings track record, or you really doubt your ability to curtail your spending a little bit when you do move in, then have a little bit of honesty with yourself, because that's going to avoid you getting into a world of pain, but also dragging your parents into that world of pain as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, consider using their help for a deposit top-up rather than just affordability padding. So, you might be looking at a house in a particular price range, and it might be that that you can afford that, but you use some extra money from mum and dad to increase the deposit so you're actually paying less on the mortgage. That could be a much better idea than saying, I can afford this, I'm going to add mum and dad's money to it so I can afford something even better now. It keeps you within your affordability range. It's just an option, something to think about.
So setting yourself for long-term success, as we mentioned, getting an agreement, but certainly focus on the first 3 years as your ownership probationary period. So the point being there is like, you just have to know that it's got to be painful while you get used to having a mortgage, while you get used to having, slightly less money to spend, while you get used to those
unexpected bills.
Yeah, bills and maintenance that's required, just a general responsibility of owning a property. So if you sort of work at that and go, okay, well, I'm just going to head down, bum up for the first few years and squirrel away and really get myself in a good position. I think that's a good way to set yourself up and get yourself in those good habits.
Yeah. And invest in your own financial literacy. Know your numbers, revisit your budget, go through it with a fine-tooth comb, adjust for rising costs.
Including interest rates, because even though now we're on a downward cycle, we're not in the hike cycle anymore. People who bought properties in, COVID, just after COVID, with really low interest rates, they often got into trouble because they didn't factor in that interest rates can rise, and as we've seen, can rise very quickly. So always be mindful that, the banks do factor in a buffer. Yes, that's true, but you
adjust your spending too.
You need to factor in a buffer just to make sure that, the rates, even if you buy a property now, and even if you get it today's rates, we're going to get a few more rate falls in the foreseeable future. Then at some point they'll rise again. They will go up and they will go down. So you have to be aware of that.
Yeah. And no one can tell you which way that's going. You have to take responsibility for yourself and actually have the buffers in place to allow for that. Just relying on someone else going, oh, no, interest rates are going down. No, you have to make sure that you have the discipline and the ability to afford it if they go back up again.
Don't make decisions on wishful thinking. That's all I can say.
Look, and this is why we built the First Home Buyer course. It's around these first 3 years. It's not actually just about getting in. It's making sure that you've done all the groundwork to make sure that you stay in and you don't become a statistic that defaults on their mortgage and then ends up having to sell the property under duress.
Oh, we want you in the right home, and we want you there for as long as you need to be there. That's what we want. So just to wrap up, if your parents are offering help, that's a privilege. You're in a very fortunate position, but it does come with responsibility. So just make sure you build those habits and the knowledge, and then that can make that help that you've been given, you can get the most out of it.
Yeah. Too many first-home buyers are leaving money on the table and hurting their future selves because they don't know how to do things in the right order. That's what we do. We teach you the exact steps you need to take and support you along the way.
We help you move from a state of information overload to feeling excited and in control. You'll learn a clear step-by-step process that takes the guesswork out of buying your first home. You'll know exactly what to look for, who to talk to, and how to navigate every stage with confidence, avoiding costly rookie mistakes along the way.
We've created your First Home Buyer course, a 10-module self-paced course plus online mentoring. Now, the course only costs $990 and you get direct access to us every week. You can share the link of any property you're thinking of buying and we can help you work out whether it's an A, B or C grade or a no-go zone. We even help guide you through your negotiations.
Trust us, you will buy a hell of a lot better with our guidance and you'll overpay a lot more than the cost of the course if you don't know what you're doing.
Thanks for joining us. If you've enjoyed this podcast, we encourage you to join our Facebook group. It's called Your First Home Buyer Guide Australia, and it's your opportunity to connect with us and ask us your questions, which we will answer. Meaning you can make sure that you're not getting led down the garden path. We hope to see you there soon.